18 years ago, her toddler was abducted from the daycare, shattering her world and stealing the most precious part of her life. But then, one day she reads a fashion magazine and sees something shocking. Clara Marin stood among the towering bookshelves of Asheville Public Library, breathing in the familiar scent of paper and binding glue as she methodically returned books to their assigned places. At 45, her light brown hair now carried strands of silver, but her hands still moved with the same practiced precision they had for the past 20 years. The library had been her sanctuary, her constant companion through life's most devastating chapter. As she positioned a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird back onto its shelf, movement at the library entrance caught her attention. A young mother, perhaps in her late 20s, struggled through the door while balancing a shopping bag and the hand of a toddler. The little girl, no more than 2 years old, bounced with each step, her blonde pigtails swinging like pendulums. "Excuse me," the mother called, approaching Clara's desk. "Could you point me toward the children's section?" Clara smiled warmly. "Of course, it's right through that archway and to your left. We just got some new picture books in yesterday." "Thank you," the mother said, tugging gently at her daughter's hand. The toddler, however, had other plans. Her tiny fingers reached for a display of colorful bookmarks, sending several fluttering to the floor. "Sophie, no touching," the mother scolded gently, crouching to collect the scattered bookmarks. "It's quite all right," Clara laughed, waving away the mother's embarrassed apology. "That's what they're there for, to grab attention." The little girl's eyes widened at Clara, and she offered a toothy grin that caught Clara's heart in a vice grip of memory. That smile, so free, so curious about everything the world had to offer, just like Ella's had been. As the mother and daughter disappeared into the children's section, Clara's practiced smile faltered. 18 years had passed, but moments like these still transported her back to that terrible day with brutal clarity. The call she'd missed while shelving books in the library basement, the 3 voicemails from Little Acorn's daycare that went unheard because her phone was tucked away in her purse. The police cars already parked outside when she arrived for pickup, their lights casting ominous red and blue shadows across the playground equipment. "There must be some mistake," she'd told the officer who approached her. "I'm just here to pick up my daughter Ella Marin." The weight of his hand on her shoulder, the gentle way he'd asked her to come inside. The security footage they showed her later that week, a trusted staff member, Maurice Pledger, leading Ella by the hand to the playground gate, checking her surroundings, then quickly bundling the child into a waiting car. For months, the search consumed everything. Clara's marriage couldn't survive the strain. Her husband David moved out before the year was done, unable to bear living in a home filled with reminders of their missing child. But Clara refused to leave Asheville. What if Ella somehow found her way back? What if there was a breakthrough in the case? The police found Maurice's body 2 weeks after the abduction, hanging from a tree in Pisgah National Forest. Suicide, they said. Guilt, they surmised. But no sign of Ella. The case grew colder with each passing year, despite Clara's desperate attempts to keep it alive. Ella's distinctive port wine birthmark, a violet-hued patch around her left eye shaped like a lotus blossom, featured in every missing child report, every news article, every flyer Clara stapled to telephone poles until they disintegrated with age and weather. "Clara?" The voice jolted her back to the present. Sarah, her co-worker, was looking at her with concern. "You okay?" "You've been staring at that shelf for 5 minutes." Clara blinked rapidly. "I'm fine, just remembering." Sarah's expression softened with understanding. After 15 years working together, she knew what those moments of stillness meant. "Why don't you head to the back room? The new deliveries came in this morning. I'll finish up here." Clara nodded gratefully. Sometimes the kindness of others still caught her off guard, even after all these years. In the back room, cardboard boxes were stacked neatly by the receiving desk. Clara pulled a box cutter from the drawer and methodically began opening the first package, her mind settling into the comfort of routine. Inside were the monthly magazine subscriptions, The Atlantic, National Geographic, and several glossy fashion publications that had proven surprisingly popular with their patrons. Clara lifted out the stack, ready to log them into the system, when the top magazine stopped her hand mid-air. Vogue. And on its cover, staring back at her with familiar eyes, was a young woman with a distinctive violet birthmark around her left eye, the exact shape of a lotus blossom. The backdrop was a sunlit farm, the model dressed in an off-the-shoulder red blouse, a patterned scarf tied over her head, and a denim jeans, looking nothing like a typical fashion model. The headline read, "The New Elegance." Clara's knees buckled. She grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself, her other hand flying to cover her mouth as a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob escaped her lips. The face was different, mature, the roundness of childhood replaced with defined cheekbones and a strong jawline. But Clara would recognize that birthmark anywhere. She'd traced it with her finger countless times as she'd rocked Ella to sleep. She'd described it to police officers, sketch artists, and anyone else who would listen. After 18 years of dead ends and fading hope, Clara Marin was looking at her daughter. With trembling hands, Clara flipped open the magazine, the crisp pages crackling under her fingertips. The cover shot had captured her attention, but it was the editorial spread inside that made her heart pound against her ribcage like a trapped bird. She found the feature article on page 32, titled, "A Visual Ode to the Hands and Hearts That Keep America Growing." The photographs were stunning, candid shots of farm life across rural America, each image infused with an authenticity rarely seen in high-fashion publications. And there she was again. The young woman Clara believed to be Ella appeared in a full-page photograph, looking over her shoulder at the camera. Unlike the other models in perfectly styled farm attire, this shot had a spontaneous quality. The woman was genuinely working, caught in a moment of pause. The sunlight caught in her light brown hair, illuminating strands of honey gold that Clara recognized from her own mirror. And there, unmistakable even in profile, was the birthmark. Clara's eyes darted to the caption beneath the photo, "Emmy Wells 20, at Kessler Farm in rural Appalachia." Emmy Wells, not Ella Marin, but the age matched. Ella would be 20 now, having been nearly 2 when she disappeared 18 years ago. With a deep breath to steady herself, Clara began reading the interview snippet that accompanied the photographs. "What's your name?" "Emmy Wells, ma. That's a lovely name." "Thanks, my mama says I was born with dirt in my veins. Why don't you wear makeup like your friends?" "Didn't have time. Was hauling hay before you showed up." "Your eyes, there's something rare about them." The rest of the article shifted focus to broader agricultural issues, the economic challenges faced by local farmers competing with imported products, the environmental impact of sustainable farming practices, the revival of traditional agricultural methods among younger generations. But Clara barely registered these details. Her mind was fixed on the young woman with her daughter's birthmark, her daughter's age, and something in her expression that reminded Clara so much of David, that quiet determination, that graceful strength. At the end of the article, Clara found what she needed. Photography by Lila Dalton. She glanced at the clock on the wall, 2:15 p.m. Pulling out her cell phone, Clara quickly searched for Detective Gary Holden's number. He'd been the lead investigator on Ella's case all those years ago, and although they'd fallen out of contact over the last few years, she still had his number saved. The call went straight to voicemail. Gary's recorded voice asked her to leave a message, but Clara hung up instead. This wasn't something to explain over voicemail. The magazine in her hands felt too important, too urgent to wait. Decision made, Clara gathered her purse and the magazine, then rushed to the front desk where Sarah was helping an elderly patron. "Sarah, I need to leave now." Clara's voice was strained, her eyes wide with barely contained emotion. Sarah took one look at Clara's face, then at the magazine clutched in her white-knuckled grip. "What's happened?" Clara flipped the magazine to show the cover. "I think I found her, Sarah. I think I found Ella." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth as she recognized the birthmark. Everyone at the library knew about Clara's missing daughter. Many of them had helped distribute flyers in those first desperate years. "Go," Sarah said immediately. "We'll cover your shift. Do you need someone to go with you?" No, I need to go to the police station. Show them this. Clara was already backing toward the door, as if afraid the magazine might vanish if she wasted another second. Let us know what happens, Sarah called after her, and Clara... She hesitated, then offered a cautious smile. Good luck. Other staff members looked up from their tasks, catching on to the commotion. Marty from reference approached, followed by Diane from circulation. When they saw the magazine, a flurry of supportive comments and hopeful wishes followed Clara as she made her way to the exit. In the parking lot, Clara slid behind the wheel of her aging Honda Civic, the magazine placed carefully on the passenger seat beside her. For a moment she simply sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, forcing herself to breathe. 18 years of false leads and disappointments had taught her to guard her hope carefully. But the birthmark, that distinctive marking, couldn't be a coincidence. It was too unique, too perfectly matched to Ella's. Clara arrived at the police station. She entered and met with the police officer at the front desk. She made her query, showing the magazine, and asked if Detective Gary Holden was here. The police said yes and asked her to wait. Then they led her inside to meet the detective. Detective Gary Holden had aged considerably since Clara had last seen him. His hair had gone completely grey, and deep lines marked his face, but his eyes were as kind and determined as she remembered. He'd been a young detective when Ella disappeared. It had been one of his first major cases, and Clara knew he'd never truly let it go. Clara, he said, rising from his desk, it's been a while. I found something, she said without preamble, setting the magazine on his desk. I think I found Ella. Clara showed him the magazine and said she found a lead. They compared the photo with Ella's childhood pictures, and the lotus-shaped birthmark looked identical. The detective quickly contacted the fashion magazine agency and asked about their recent publication and the photographer Lila Dalton. The detective put the call on speaker so Clara could listen as well. The magazine agency told the police they visited remote farms in rural Appalachia and other old traditional American places for this month's edition. Lila Dalton spontaneously photographed farmer families in everyday, non-professional settings. The representative on the phone was excited about how authentic the images had turned out. Ms. Dalton has a real eye for capturing genuine moments, the woman explained. The spread has been getting wonderful feedback. I'm sure it has, Detective Gary said. We're actually calling about one specific photograph, the young woman on the cover, Emmy Wells. Oh yes, she was quite a find. Not a professional model at all, just a farm girl with the most interesting birthmark. Makes her look quite mysterious, doesn't it? Clara pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting back tears as the woman casually discussed her daughter's distinctive mark. The detective requested the specific location where they took the photograph of Emmy Wells. They said it was at the Kessler farm. The owners of the farm were John and Miriam Kessler. The representative said there's no specific point on the map, but they gave them another farm's name and location, saying that Kessler Farm was about 10 miles north of it. This is enough to reopen the investigation, he said carefully after the phone call ended. I'll put together a team to visit the Kessler farm immediately. Clara stood up, determination etched on her face. I'm going with them. Gary hesitated. Clara, in cases like this... I'm going, Gary, she interrupted, her voice leaving no room for argument. I've waited 18 years. I'm not waiting another day. This is as close as we've ever gotten. After a moment, Gary nodded. I understand, but I need to make some arrangements first. I have a court appearance scheduled for later today that I can't miss. Clara's face fell. You're not coming. I can't, he said apologetically, but I'll send my best officers and I'll join you tomorrow. The important thing is to establish if this Emmy Wells is your Ella, and if so, how she ended up at the Kessler farm. Clara nodded reluctantly. When can we leave? I'll have a team ready in 30 minutes. 2 officers will accompany you to the farm. Gary paused, placing a hand on her shoulder. Clara, I need you to prepare yourself. Even if this young woman is Ella, she's been living another life for 18 years. She may not remember you. Clara swallowed hard. I know, but she's my daughter. That's all that matters right now. As promised, within half an hour, Clara found herself being introduced to Officers Bennett and Martinez, who would be accompanying her to the Kessler farm. "I'd like to follow in my own car," Clara told them. "I have some of Ella's childhood belongings in the trunk. Things I've kept, just in case." The officers exchanged glances, but agreed to her request. As Clara walked toward the parking lot, her heart hammered with equal parts hope and fear. After nearly 2 decades of emptiness, she was finally on the path to finding her daughter. A daughter who might not even know she was lost. The convoy of 2 vehicles, Clara's Honda Civic trailing the marked police cruiser, wound its way out of Asheville and into the countryside, the paved highways narrowing into winding roads through dense forests and rolling hills over the 2-hour drive. Gripping the wheel tightly, Clara followed closely, each passing mile fueling the storm inside her, hope that she was about to see her daughter again, and terror that Emmy Wells might look at her as a stranger. The afternoon sun hung high in the clear autumn sky when the GPS finally announced they were approaching their destination. The police car slowed, turning onto a gravel driveway marked by a weathered wooden sign. Kessler Farm established. 1962. The property was impressive, a sprawling farmhouse with a wide front porch surrounded by well-maintained barns and outbuildings. Fields of crops stretched into the distance, and a small orchard occupied the hillside behind the house. This was no struggling family farm, but a prosperous agricultural operation. As Clara parked behind the police cruiser, a middle-aged couple emerged from the farmhouse. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with a weather-beaten face that spoke of decades working outdoors. The woman beside him was petite, her greying hair pulled back in a practical bun, her expression wary as she observed the police car. Officers Bennett and Martinez approached the couple, badges displayed. Clara hung back slightly, her heart thundering in her chest as she strained to hear the conversation. "Mr. and Mrs. Kessler?" Officer Bennett asked. "That's right," the man confirmed. "I'm John Kessler, and this is my wife, Miriam. What brings the police all the way out here?" Officer Bennett gestured toward Clara. "This is Mrs. Clara Marin. She has reason to believe that a young woman who was photographed on your property might be her daughter, who went missing 18 years ago." John and Miriam exchanged a quick glance that Clara couldn't quite interpret. "You must mean the magazine people," Miriam said carefully. "They were here a few weeks ago, taking pictures for some fashion spread." "We're looking for a young woman named Emmy Wells," Officer Martinez clarified. "According to the magazine, she was working here when they did their photo shoot." John Kessler shook his head slowly. "Emmy doesn't work for us permanently. She was just helping out that day. We rotate workers weekly from other farms in the area. Labor sharing, you know." Clara stepped forward, unable to contain herself any longer. "My daughter had a distinctive birthmark around her left eye," she said, her voice surprisingly steady as she pulled out a childhood photograph of Ella. "Just like the young woman in these photographs, my daughter was taken from her daycare when she was almost 2 years old." Miriam's face softened with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. "I'm so sorry about your daughter, Mrs. Marin. I can't imagine what you've been through." She studied the photograph Clara held out. "The birthmark is similar, I'll grant you that, but Emmy just happened to be working here that day. After the photo shoot, we haven't seen her again." "Do you know where we might find her?" Officer Bennett asked. John scratched his beard thoughtfully. "She came from Rowan's farm, I believe. He's the one who sends us day workers when we need extra hands." "Rowan," Clara repeated. "Do you have his full name and address?" John shook his head. "Just Rowan." "It's a family arrangement. Been that way since my father's time. I've got his number, though." He pulled a small notebook from his pocket and tore out a page, scribbling a number on it. "Don't know where his place is exactly. Never been there myself. Somewhere up in the mountains, I hear. Pretty isolated." Officer Martinez accepted the paper. "Thank you, Mr. Kessler. Would you mind if we take a look around your property, just to be thorough?" The Kesslers hesitated, exchanging another of those unreadable glances. "Well, I suppose that would be all right," John finally agreed, though his tone suggested reluctance. Not sure what you expect to find, but you're welcome to look. Thank you, Officer Bennett said. Mrs. Marin, would you like to wait here while we check the premises? Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As the officers moved toward the barn, she found herself studying the Kesslers. There was something in their manner that didn't quite sit right with her. A careful precision to their words, a tension in their postures that seemed at odds with their cooperative attitudes. Miriam noticed her scrutiny and offered a tight smile. Would you like some water or tea, Mrs. Marin? It's a long drive from Asheville. No, thank you, Clara replied, then hesitated before adding, when Emmy was here, did she mention anything about her family, her childhood? Not really, Miriam said. She was quiet, kept to herself mostly. Good worker, though, very diligent. John nodded in agreement. Farm kids usually are, raised with a strong work ethic. 20 minutes later, the officers returned, their expressions neutral. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. and Mrs. Kessler, Officer Martinez said. Everything seems to be in order. The group returned to the vehicles where Officer Bennett made a call to the station, relaying the phone number for Rowan and requesting any information they could find on him. Clara listened as Bennett explained the situation, then waited as the dispatcher ran the number through their database. After several minutes, Bennett ended the call with a frown. Nothing, he informed Clara and his partner. The number doesn't appear in any of our systems, and there's no cellular service registered to it in any of the surrounding counties. If this Rowan lives as remotely as the Kesslers suggest, he might be outside regular coverage areas. What does that mean? Clara asked, her heart sinking. How do we find him? We'll try calling the number directly, Martinez suggested, dialing on his phone. After several moments, he shook his head. No connection. Either the number is incorrect or he's somewhere with no service. Clara glanced at her watch. It was nearly 4 in the afternoon. The autumn days were growing shorter, and darkness would fall within a couple of hours. What now? She asked, fighting to keep the desperation from her voice. Bennett sighed. Without a specific location, we can't just drive aimlessly into the mountains looking for this farm. I think our best option is to return to Asheville, gather more resources, and start fresh in the morning. Detective Holden will be available tomorrow, and he might have some additional ideas or contacts. Clara wanted to protest, to insist they continue searching, but the pragmatic part of her knew they were right. Without a clear direction, they could waste hours driving through remote mountain roads and still find nothing. All right, she agreed reluctantly, but I'm not going all the way back to Asheville tonight. I'll find somewhere local to stay, a motel or something. That way we can start early tomorrow. The officers nodded in understanding. That's reasonable, Martinez said. We'll report back to the station and coordinate with Detective Holden for tomorrow morning. As they parted ways, Clara sat in her car for a long moment, staring at the Kessler farmhouse in her rearview mirror. Something about John and Miriam's carefully measured responses nagged at her. They had been polite, sympathetic even, but there was a guardedness about them that seemed out of place for people with nothing to hide. With a deep breath, Clara started her engine. She was closer to finding Ella than she'd been in 18 years. One more night wouldn't break her, not after all this time. The fading afternoon light cast long shadows across the rural landscape as Clara drove away from the Kessler farm. Her mind raced with unanswered questions, her emotions oscillating between hope and frustration. After driving for about 20 minutes, she spotted a modest roadside establishment with a flickering neon sign, Pine Ridge Motel, vacancy. The motel was a single-story building with perhaps a dozen rooms. Clara parked in front of the office and stepped out, stretching her stiff limbs after the long day of driving. Inside, a middle-aged woman with bottle-red hair and reading glasses perched on her nose looked up from a dog-eared paperback. "Help you?" she asked, setting her book aside. "I need a room for the night," Clara replied. "Just one person." $29 includes cable TV and hot water, the woman said, pushing a registration card across the desk. "I'm Dottie, by the way. I own the place." Clara filled out the form and handed over her cash. As Dottie processed the payment, Clara noticed a flyer on the bulletin board advertising local attractions. One image caught her eye, a rustic building with strings of lights illuminating a wooden deck. "What's that place?" she asked, pointing to the flyer. Dottie glanced over. "Oh, that's Miller's Tavern. Popular spot around here, just across the road, actually." She nodded toward the window, where Clara could see a larger building on the opposite side of the highway. "They've got good food, live music sometimes. Tonight's their comedy night, I think. Always draws a crowd." Clara accepted her room key, her mind already forming a plan. "Does it get busy?" "With locals, I mean." "Sure does, especially on event nights. Farmers, tradespeople, all the folks from around these parts gather there. It's about the only entertainment for 20 miles in any direction." Dottie studied Clara with newfound curiosity. "You're not from around here, are you?" "No, I'm from Asheville. I'm actually looking for someone." Clara hesitated, then pulled out the magazine she'd carefully kept, revealing the cover featuring Emmy. "Have you ever seen this young woman? She might go by the name Emmy Wells." Dottie squinted at the page, then shook her head. "Can't say I have. Pretty girl, though. That birthmark is something else." Clara's hopes deflated slightly. What about a man named Rowan? Supposedly has a farm somewhere in the mountains. "I think I have." But again, Dottie shook her head. "Sorry, honey. Lot of farmers around these parts, and I can't be certain." She handed back Clara's magazine. "But like I said, the tavern gets all the locals. If you're looking for information, that's your best bet." "Thank you," Clara said, pocketing her phone. "I'll try there tonight." "Room 8, Dottie said, handing over a key attached to a plastic tag. "End of the row next to the ice machine. Checkout's at 11 tomorrow." Clara thanked her again and retreated to her room. After a quick shower to rinse off the day's tension, she waited until the event's start time before heading to the tavern. If local insight could lead her to the elusive Rowan, and possibly to Emmy, she couldn't risk missing the chance. Miller's Tavern was exactly as Clara had imagined a rural country establishment would be. Wooden walls adorned with vintage farming equipment and taxidermy, mismatched tables and chairs scattered throughout the space, and a long bar stretching along one wall. The air was thick with the smell of fried food, beer, and the faint trace of cigarette smoke that had seeped into the wood over decades. Despite it being a weeknight, the place was bustling. A small stage at the far end of the room featured a young man with a beard and flannel shirt, delivering punchlines to an appreciative audience. Laughter rippled through the crowd as Clara made her way to the bar. She found an empty stool and settled in, scanning the room. Most patrons were focused on the comedy show, though some gathered around the large wooden tables at the back, engaged in their own conversations. At the bar itself, a few solitary drinkers nursed their beverages, seemingly regulars based on their comfortable demeanor. "What can I get you?" a voice asked. Clara turned to find a bartender looking at her expectantly. He was young, early 20s perhaps, with dark hair pulled back in a small ponytail, and the kind of easy smile that suggested he genuinely enjoyed his work. "Just a club soda, please," Clara replied. The bartender nodded, filling a glass with ice and soda water. As he placed it before her, he tilted his head curiously. "First time at Miller's?" he asked. Clara nodded. "Is it that obvious?" He chuckled. "Small town, I know most faces that come through that door." He extended his hand. "I'm Bran Pledger. This is my dad's place, but I'm the one who runs it most nights." The name sent a jolt through Clara's system. Pledger. The same surname as Maurice, the daycare worker who had abducted Ella. But it couldn't be. Pledger wasn't an uncommon name, and this young man would have been a child himself when Ella disappeared. "Clara," she managed, returning his handshake. "Clara Marin." "So, Clara Marin," Bran said, leaning slightly against the bar. "What brings you to our little corner of nowhere? We don't get many tourists this time of year." Clara took a sip of her club soda, gathering her thoughts. "I'm looking for someone, actually." "Oh," Bran raised an eyebrow. "Anyone I might know?" Clara hesitated, then decided on honesty. "My daughter. She was taken from her daycare 18 years ago when she was almost 2. The words still caught in her throat, even after all this time. I never found her. Bran's easy smile faded, replaced by genuine concern. I'm sorry to hear that. That's awful. I think I might have a lead, Clara said, reaching instinctively for the magazine before realizing it wasn't in her bag. Oh, my bad. This brain's getting old. I left it in my car, but there was a young woman featured in a fashion magazine with my daughter's distinctive birthmark. The photo was taken at a farm nearby, the Kessler farm. Bran straightened up slightly. The Kesslers? They don't come in here much. Keep to themselves mostly. The woman in the photo was named Emmy Wells, Clara pressed. The Kesslers said she was a day worker. As she spoke, Clara noticed Bran's expression shifting subtly, a tightening around his eyes, a slight tensing of his jaw. My mother worked at a daycare center, he said suddenly, his voice quieter, before she passed away. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Oh? Where was that? Asheville, Bran replied, but she died when I was young. My dad raised me after that. He gestured vaguely toward the tavern. Built this place up from nothing. A chill ran down Clara's spine. What were the odds of such a coincidence? Your mother, she began carefully. What was her name? Maurice, he answered. Maurice Pledger. The name hit Clara like a physical blow. Maurice Pledger, the daycare worker who had taken Ella, the woman whose body had been found in the forest 2 weeks after the abduction. Clara struggled to keep her expression neutral as her mind raced. The police had concluded that Maurice had committed suicide, probably out of guilt, after selling Ella away, because the police couldn't find the girl with her. Is everything okay? Bran asked, noticing her reaction. You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine, Clara lied, just tired from the drive. She glanced around the bar, trying to gather her thoughts. That's when she spotted it. A framed photograph of the woman on the shelf behind the bar, partially hidden among bottles of liquor. Actually, I'm not. Clara took a deep breath. Bran, I need to tell you something, she said, her voice low but steady. Your mother. I know who she was. Bran frowned. What do you mean? I recognized her in that photograph because I've seen her face hundreds of times. Clara pulled out her phone, scrolling to an old news article with Maurice's photo. Your mother was the daycare worker who took my daughter. Bran's face drained of color as he looked from the phone to Clara and back again. No, he said, shaking his head. That can't be right. My mum, she was a good person. Dad always said... The security cameras at Little Acorn's daycare captured her leading my daughter out to a waiting car, Clara continued, her voice gaining strength. 2 weeks later, they found her body in Pisgah National Forest. The police believed she killed herself out of guilt. Bran braced himself against the bar, visibly shaken. This can't be happening, he muttered. Then louder, Are you sure? Absolutely sure it was her. Clara nodded. I'm certain, Bran, I'm sorry. He ran a hand over his face, then abruptly turned and called to another bartender, Jake, cover for me. Without waiting for a reply, he motioned for Clara to follow him to a quieter corner of the tavern. Once seated at an empty table, Bran leaned forward, his voice barely audible over the comedy show still in progress. My dad told me Mum died because of debt collectors, he said. He said my mum had paid back a man my dad owed money to, but the man killed her anyway and made it look like suicide. He hung her from a tree. Clara's breath caught. The official report was suicide, but there were always questions. She hesitated, then asked, Did your father ever mention anything about a child? About what happened to her? Bran shook his head vehemently. No, never. I was only 5 when Mum died. Dad never talked much about it. It was too painful for him. His eyes suddenly widened with realization. You think my mom took your daughter to pay off my dad's debts, and then what? Sold her? That was the police theory, Clara confirmed softly. But they never found Ella. The trail went cold after your mother died. Bran was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. Finally, he said, "I'm so sorry for what my family did to yours. I had no idea." His eyes met Clara's, filled with genuine remorse. "But now you think your daughter might be here, this Emmy person?" Clara nodded. "The birthmark is identical, a violet patch around the left eye shaped like a lotus blossom, and she's the right age." "And the Kesslers mentioned someone named Rowan," Bran murmured, more to himself than to Clara. He suddenly straightened. "Rowan is my father's name." Clara stared at him in shock. "Your father is Rowan Pledger?" Bran nodded slowly. "Yes, and I'd recognize his phone number anywhere, but that's the old one." He pulled out his phone, showing her the contact entry for Dad. The new number didn't match the one John Kessler had given to the police. "The Kesslers lied," Clara whispered. "They said they didn't know where Rowan lived, that he was somewhere in the mountains. But if he's your father, and he owns this tavern—" "He doesn't live at the tavern," Bran explained. "He has a place about 20 minutes from here. A small farm, nothing like the Kesslers' operation, but enough to grow some crops and raise a few animals." He paused, a conflicted expression crossing his face. "I don't see him much these days, not since—" "Since what?" Clara prompted gently. Bran sighed heavily. "Since I found out about his gambling problems. The tavern does well now, but Dad still has issues. I've been trying to keep my distance, focus on running this place right." He met Clara's gaze with newfound determination. "But I think it's time I paid him a visit, and I think you should come with me." Clara felt a surge of hope mixed with apprehension. "You'd do that? Even after what I just told you about your mother?" "Especially because of that," Bran replied firmly. "If my family had anything to do with taking your daughter, then I need to help make it right." He glanced at his watch. "It's not too late, we could go now." "Now?" Clara echoed, suddenly nervous at how quickly things were moving. Bran nodded. "Jake can handle the bar for the rest of the night." He looked at Clara intently. "Unless you'd rather wait until morning. Get the police involved." Clara considered this briefly, then shook her head. "Number, I've waited 18 years. I don't want to wait another minute." Bran stood, determination in his stance. "I'll tell Jake I'm leaving and we can go. My car's out back, but—" "I'll follow in my car," Clara interjected. "I have some things there. Photographs, belongings of Ella's that I've kept. They might help." With a nod of agreement, Bran went to inform his co-worker while Clara finished her drink, her mind racing with possibilities. Was she finally on the verge of finding Ella after all these years? And if so, what role had Rowan Pledger played in her disappearance? The night had fully settled over the rural landscape as Clara followed Bran's pickup truck along winding back roads. Her headlights illuminated the occasional reflective eyes of wildlife watching from the roadside, and the moon cast an ethereal glow over the rolling countryside. During a straight stretch of road, Clara quickly used her phone to text Detective Holden that she believed she was getting closer to finding her daughter, and shared her pinpoint location with him just in case. She knew the reception was spotty in these rural areas, but hoped the message would go through. Clara's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her mind replaying Bran's revelations about his parents. If Rowan Pledger was indeed the mysterious Rowan mentioned by the Kesslers, and if he was Maurice's husband, then the connections were becoming clearer and more disturbing. But one detail nagged at her. John Kessler had claimed Rowan lived up in the mountains, yet Bran's directions were taking them through relatively flat farmland. Either the Kesslers had been deliberately misleading, or they weren't talking about the same Rowan. After about 20 minutes of driving, Bran's pickup slowed, turning onto a narrow dirt road marked only by a weathered mailbox. Clara followed cautiously, her sedan bouncing over the uneven surface. Before they reached the house, Clara noticed a vehicle. An older model sedan was pulling out of the driveway ahead. Bran must have noticed as well, and that vehicle must be Rowan's, because Bran's pickup had trailed behind it, putting a distance between Clara's and the sedan. The roads became progressively narrower, the landscape more densely wooded. Clara drove more slowly than Rowan's car, unfamiliar with the terrain and concerned about damaging her vehicle on the rough roads. Bran, however, seemed determined not to lose sight of his father's car. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes, the car ahead turned into a clearing. As Clara followed Bran's truck into the open space, she saw a small farmhouse and several outbuildings. The property was modest compared to the Kesslers' operation, but well maintained, with a small vegetable garden visible in the moonlight and a fenced pasture where a few goats were visible. Rowan's car was parked haphazardly near the house, its driver's door still open. Bran pulled up beside it, and Clara parked a short distance away. As she exited her car, Clara could hear Bran calling out to his father, "Dad, what are you doing at the farm this late? I went by your house and saw you leaving." Rowan Pledger stood by his car, a tall man with the same dark hair as his son, though streaked with grey. His weathered face held a mixture of confusion and wariness as he looked from Bran to Clara. "Bran, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice deep and gruff. "And who's this woman?" Bran approached his father, his posture tense. "This is Clara Marin, Dad. She came to the tavern looking for her daughter, a daughter who was kidnapped 18 years ago by Mom." Rowan's expression shifted, a flash of recognition quickly masked by confusion. "What are you talking about? Your mother never kidnapped anyone." "She did, Dad," Bran said, his voice tight with emotion. "Clara has proof. Security camera footage from the daycare where Mom worked. She took Clara's daughter, a little girl named Ella." Rowan's eyes darted to Clara, then back to his son. "This is ridiculous. Why would you bring this woman here, making these kinds of accusations in the middle of a night?" Clara stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Mr. Pledger, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to find my daughter. The Kesslers mentioned someone named Rowan, who arranges day workers for their farm, and gave me your number. I've been trying to reach you, but I couldn't get through. Your son said it was one of the old lines." A subtle shift occurred in Rowan's demeanor at the mention of the Kesslers. His shoulders tensed and his expression hardened. "Those rich idiots," he muttered, almost to himself. Then louder, "Look, I don't know what the Kesslers told you, but—" Before he could finish, the front door of the farmhouse opened, and a young woman stepped onto the porch. "Rowan," she called out, "what's going on out there? Why didn't you come inside?" The voice belonged to a young woman Clara couldn't quite make out in the darkness, but her silhouette was unmistakable, tall and slender, with hair that fell past her shoulders. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? But Rowan quickly moved to intercept any view of the porch. "Nothing to worry about," he called back. "Just some unexpected visitors. Go back inside, I'll be there in a minute." The figure hesitated but remained on the porch, clearly curious about the late-night commotion. "Is that Emmy?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emmy Wells?" Rowan's face darkened. "You need to leave, both of you, now." Bran stepped closer to his father. "Dad, what's going on? Who is that woman? And why are Mom and Dad sending people to you about day workers?" The standoff might have continued, but the young woman on the porch apparently decided to investigate for herself. She descended the steps and walked toward the group, her features gradually becoming visible in the combined glow of the porch light and the vehicle's headlights. "What's happening?" she asked, looking between the three adults with confusion. And that's when Clara saw it. The distinctive violet birthmark around the young woman's left eye, shaped exactly like a lotus blossom, exactly like Ella's. "Oh my God," Clara breathed, her legs suddenly unsteady. The young woman, Emmy, looked at Clara with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Who are you?" Clara took a hesitant step forward, every fibre of her being wanting to rush to the young woman and embrace her. But she restrained herself, recognizing the wariness in Emmy's expression. "My name is Clara Marin," she said gently. I believe you might be my daughter." Emmy stared at Clara, her expression morphing from confusion to disbelief. "What? That's impossible. My parents are John and Miriam Kessler." Rowan stepped between them, his weathered face tight with tension. "Now hold on. This woman has no proof of anything. She's making wild accusations." Bran moved closer to Emmy, studying her face with newfound attention. "The birthmark," he murmured. "It's exactly as Clara described." Emmy self-consciously touched the violet mark around her left eye. "What about my birthmark?" Clara slowly reached into her purse and withdrew her phone. With trembling fingers, she pulled up a photo album and turned the screen toward Emmy. "This is my daughter, Ella. She was taken from her daycare when she was almost 2 years old, 18 years ago." Emmy reluctantly looked at the screen, her eyes widening at the series of photos showing a toddler with an identical birthmark. "This doesn't make sense," she said, her voice barely audible. "I grew up on the farm. I've always lived with John and Miriam." Rowan made a dismissive sound. "This is ridiculous. Emmy, go back inside. I need to speak with these people alone." Emmy ignored him, her attention fixed on Clara's phone as she swiped through more childhood photos. "If what you're saying is true, then John and Miriam aren't your parents," Clara finished softly. "The Kesslers told me that you were a day worker sent by Rowan. They claimed they barely knew you." Emmy's head snapped up at this, her expression hardening. "What? That's a lie. They raised me." Rowan cursed under his breath. "Those Kessler morons, what were they thinking? Giving away my name and number?" Bran turned to his father, suspicion darkening his features. "Dad, what's going on here? What do you know about this?" Rowan looked between the three faces staring at him and seemed to deflate slightly. "Look, it's complicated." "Uncomplicate it," Bran demanded, an edge in his voice that Clara hadn't heard before. Rowan ran a hand through his greying hair. "The Kesslers asked me to keep Emmy here for a few weeks. They said someone was looking for her, someone dangerous who might try to take her away because they couldn't pay their debt." "Debt?" Emmy echoed, confusion evident on her face. "What debt?" "The farm is doing well, it always has." "That's what they told me," Rowan insisted. "They said there were creditors, dangerous people looking for you. They wanted to keep you safe until things blew over." Bran scoffed. "And you believed them? After what happened with Mom?" "What about his mum?" Emmy asked, looking increasingly distressed by the unfolding revelations. Clara stepped forward cautiously. "Bran's mother, Maurice Pledger, worked at Little Acorns Daycare in Asheville. She's the one who took my daughter, who took you, 18 years ago." "You would have been too young to remember anything before," Clara explained gently. "You weren't even 2 years old when you disappeared." "But why?" Emmy asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Why would someone take me from my family?" Bran looked at his father accusingly. "Dad had gambling debts. The police believed Mom took Ella to pay them off. Then those creditors killed Mom and made it look like suicide." Emmy leaned against the porch railing, visibly shaken. "So if I'm really this Ella person, how did I end up with John and Miriam?" "Your parents have always wanted children," Rowan explained reluctantly. "They couldn't have their own. They'd been trying to adopt for years, but were always rejected because of John's past. He had some legal troubles when he was younger, so they found another way." "They bought me?" Emmy asked, her voice hollow with disbelief. Rowan nodded slowly. "From the same people who killed Maurice, yes. Those creditors weren't just loan sharks. They were involved in more lucrative enterprises." Emmy wrapped her arms around herself, as if suddenly cold despite the mild evening. "So everything I thought I knew about myself is a lie?" "This is insane," Emmy said, anger rising in her voice. "Everyone is lying about everything." Before the night could get any deeper, the sound of sirens cut through the night, distant but approaching rapidly. "Someone called the police," Rowan said, panic rising in his voice. "Number, this can't be. If the Kessler knew about this, or those traffickers, if they suspected police involvement, they would send people after me." "No more running," Emmy said firmly. "No more lies." She pulled out her cell phone, showing the screen. "I called them when I first heard you arguing outside. I want the truth, all of it, and I'm not afraid to face it." The flashing lights of police cruisers lit up the farmyard as several officers approached. Clara recognized some of them from earlier that day, but Officers Bennett and Martinez were nowhere in sight. "What's going on here?" asked an officer, his hand resting cautiously on his holster as he assessed the situation. Emmy stepped forward. "I called you. My name is Emmy Wells, at least that's what I've always been told. But this woman," she gestured to Clara, "says I'm her daughter who was kidnapped 18 years ago." The officer's eyes widened slightly as he connected the dots. "You're the missing person from Asheville? The one with the birthmark?" Emmy nodded, unconsciously touching the violet mark around her eye. Clara reached out. Another officer spoke into his radio, confirming they had located the subject of the recent alert. "We'll need all of you to come to the station to sort this out," the first officer said. Clara stepped forward and reported the Kesslers to the nearest officer, urgently explaining their involvement in Emmy's abduction. The officer's expression turned grave as he radioed for backup to bring the Kesslers in for questioning. "We're going to need all of you to come to the station immediately," he said. "We have officers securing this property as a potential crime scene." They were each guided to separate police vehicles. As Clara was escorted to a cruiser, she caught Emmy's eye. The young woman's expression was a complex mixture of fear, determination, and something like hope. At the station, Clara was led to an interview room, a small, sparse space with a table, 3 chairs, and a conspicuous camera mounted in one corner. An officer offered her water and informed her that Detective Holden from Asheville had been contacted and was en route. "He asked us to tell you he's about an hour away," the officer added. "In the meantime, we'd like to take your statement about what happened tonight." Clara recounted everything, finding the magazine, visiting the Kessler farm, meeting Bran at the tavern, and finally confronting Rowan at his property. The officer took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly letting Clara speak uninterrupted. When she had finished, the officer thanked her and left her alone with her thoughts. Time crept by slowly, the institutional clock on the wall marking each minute with a soft click that seemed to echo in the quiet room. After what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes, the door opened again. A different officer entered, his expression more formal than the previous one. "Mrs. Marin, I wanted to update you on the situation," he said, taking a seat across from her. "We've been interviewing the Kesslers and Mr. Pledger separately. Based on the preliminary information gathered, we believe there is substantial evidence supporting your claim that Emmy Wells is indeed your biological daughter, Ella Marin." Clara's heart leapt at these words, but the officer continued before she could respond. "The Kesslers have admitted to purchasing an infant from a third party 18 years ago. They claim they were desperate for a child and were approached by intermediaries who said they could provide one for the right price." "And they never questioned where the child came from?" Clara asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "They claim they were told the child was being given up by a mother who couldn't care for her," the officer explained, "but they've admitted they suspected the circumstances were not legitimate, which is why they isolated Ella on their farm and discouraged her from forming outside connections." Clara shook her head in disbelief. "They stole her entire life, her identity." "They will be facing charges," the officer confirmed. "As for Rowan Pledger, he's cooperating by providing information about the trafficking network his wife was involved with. While he was apparently part of it, we're still verifying the extent of his involvement. His cooperation could potentially reduce his sentence, but he will still face serious charges for his role in these operations." "What about Maurice Pledger's death?" Clara asked. "All these years it was ruled a suicide, but if what Rowan says is true—" "We're reopening that investigation based on Mr. Pledger's statement," the officer confirmed. "He claims the same criminal organization murdered his wife when they feared she might talk to authorities after the abduction gained significant media attention." Clara nodded slowly, processing this information. "And Emmy, what happens now?" The officer's expression softened slightly. "She's an adult, Mrs. Marin. Legally, she can make her own decisions about where she goes and who she maintains relationships with. But she has expressed interest in speaking with you further." Hope bloomed in Clara's chest. "Can I see her now?" "She's still being interviewed, but afterward, yes." The officer stood, adjusting his uniform. "Detective Holden should be arriving shortly. He's been briefed on the developments and will take over the case from here. As the officer reached the door, Clara called after him, "Officer, thank you for everything." He nodded once, then left her alone again with her thoughts and the steadily ticking clock. Clara sat in the small waiting area of the police station, a paper cup of lukewarm coffee held between her hands, more for comfort than consumption. The institutional lighting cast harsh shadows across the worn furniture, but Clara barely noticed her surroundings. Her eyes remained fixed on the hallway door, waiting for Emmy, for Ella, to emerge. When the door finally opened, Clara's breath caught in her throat. Emmy stood in the doorway, her posture straight despite the obvious exhaustion in her features. She hesitated for a moment, then walked toward Clara, taking the seat beside her. For a long moment neither spoke. The silence between them was filled with 18 years of absence, of lives lived apart, of experiences never shared. Finally, Emmy broke the silence. "I never thought I'd be in a police station at midnight discovering my entire life has been a lie." Despite the gravity of her words, there was a surprising steadiness in her voice. "I never thought I'd find you," Clara replied softly. "After all these years, I'd started to believe I never would." Emmy turned to face her, studying Clara's features with careful attention. "They're charging John and Miriam with kidnapping, falsification of documents, and obstruction of justice." "I'm sorry," Clara said, and found that she meant it. "I know they raised you, cared for you." "They did," Emmy acknowledged, "but they also isolated me, controlled who I could see, where I could go. They always said it was for my protection, that the outside world was dangerous." A bitter smile crossed her face. "I guess now I know why." Clara hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "How did you end up in that magazine? If they were so careful about keeping you hidden?" Emmy's expression softened slightly. "That was an accident. The photographer, Lila, was taking pictures of the neighboring farm. She got lost and ended up on our property. I was working in the fields when she spotted me." A small, proud smile touched her lips. "She said my birthmark was striking, unique, that it made me photogenic." I smiled for her. John and Miriam were furious afterward, but by then it was too late. The photos were already scheduled for publication. "I'm glad she got lost," Clara said. "That birthmark, it's how I knew it was you. I would have recognized it anywhere." Emmy touched the mark self-consciously. "The Kesslers always made me feel it was something to hide, something shameful." "It's beautiful," Clara assured her. "Your father, your birth father, David, he called it your lotus mark. He said it meant you were special." A flicker of interest crossed Emmy's face. "My father, is he—" "He's alive," Clara said. "We divorced a few years after you disappeared. The loss was too much for our marriage to bear. He remarried and moved to Colorado. We haven't spoken in years, but I know he'd want to meet you if you're interested." Emmy nodded slowly, absorbing this information. "All my life I've felt different, out of place somehow. There were things about me that never made sense in the context of the Kesslers, the way I think, the things I'm drawn to." She trailed off, lost in thought. "You have your father's determination," Clara offered gently, "and his kindness. Even as a toddler, you showed those traits." Emmy looked at her with sudden intensity. "I have so many questions about who I was, who I am, about my life before." "I'll answer anything I can," Clara promised. "We have time now." The door to the hallway opened again, and the detective appeared, looking tired but satisfied. He nodded respectfully to Clara before addressing them both. "The Kesslers are being processed for formal charges," he informed them. "Rowan Pledger is cooperating fully with our investigation into the trafficking network. His information could help break up one of the largest human trafficking operations in the Southeast." "What will happen to him?" Emmy asked. "He'll face charges for his involvement," Detective Holden explained, "but his cooperation will be taken into consideration. The fact that he never directly participated in abductions may help his case." The door opened once more and Bran entered the waiting area, his expression solemn. "They're letting me go," he said, approaching the group. "They said I'm not implicated in any of this." He looked at Emmy with genuine remorse. "I'm so sorry for what my family did to yours. I had no idea." Emmy studied him for a moment. "It's not your fault. You were just a child when it happened." Bran nodded gratefully, then turned to Clara. "It's strange to think that if I hadn't been working at the tavern tonight, you might never have made the connection." "Maybe it wasn't just chance," Clara suggested. "Maybe some things are meant to find a way." The detective cleared his throat. "We'll need both of you back tomorrow for additional statements. Detective Holden will be here too tomorrow, but you're free to go for now. Emmy, do you have somewhere you can stay tonight?" Emmy glanced at Clara, uncertainty in her eyes. I don't want to go back to the farm, not yet. Not until I process all of this." "You could stay with me in the motel if you want," Clara offered tentatively. "We can order another room." As they prepared to leave the station, the Kesslers were being led through the waiting area in handcuffs. Emmy stiffened at the sight of them, and John and Miriam both looked up, their faces etched with shame and regret. As the officers led the Kesslers away to processing, Bran approached Emmy once more. "It's strange," he said quietly. "Both of our lives were shaped by what happened 18 years ago, and neither of us knew it until today." In that moment, something shifted in Emmy's expression, a tentative acceptance, perhaps even the first fragile thread of trust. Clara squeezed her daughter's hand gently. "We have time now to figure it all out piece by piece." She asked her permission to embrace her, and when Emmy opened her arm, Clara embraced not only her daughter but who she had become, no longer her little girl Ella, but Emmy, a strong, independent spirit who had somehow found her way back against impossible odds. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, rediscovering what was lost and building something new in its place. The theatre of life had given them a second act neither had dared to imagine, one filled with the promise of healing, understanding, and a bond that even 18 years of separation couldn't sever completely. After 18 years of desperate searching, Clara Marin finally found her abducted daughter Emmy, believing their reunion would mark the beginning of healing and rebuilding their shattered relationship. But her relief quickly turned to horror as she uncovered the shocking truth behind her daughter's disappearance 18 years ago, a betrayal that ran far deeper than she had ever imagined. The hope of rebuilding their relationship was threatened as mother and daughter were pulled into a web of buried secrets and dangerous people determined to keep the past hidden. Before we dive into part 2 of this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from today. And if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. 1 week had passed since Clara Marin discovered her long-lost daughter. The revelation that had begun with a magazine cover had transformed into a whirlwind of police interviews, tearful reunions, and tentative steps toward rebuilding a relationship shattered 18 years ago. Clara and Emmy sat across from each other at a corner table in Miller's Tavern, the rural establishment where their paths had intersected just 7 days earlier. The wooden interior felt different now, less mysterious, more comforting in its familiarity. Behind the bar, Bran Pledger mixed drinks with practiced ease, occasionally glancing their way with a smile of quiet support. "I never thought I'd be back here so soon," Clara said, running her finger along the rim of her glass, "but it feels right somehow. Full circle." Emmy nodded, her distinctive birthmark catching the warm light of the tavern. "I've been through this area countless times over the years, but I've never actually been inside this place until now. John and Miriam didn't approve of tavern." The week had been relentless. Hours of giving statements, answering questions from various law enforcement agencies. Each day seemed to bring investigators back with more queries, more forms to sign, more details to recall. The investigation had expanded beyond Emmy's abduction to target the creditor organization that doubled as a human trafficking network. For their safety, Emmy and Clara had been temporarily placed in secure accommodations in the rural Appalachian town while the investigation continued. Detective Gary Holden had been a constant presence, coordinating with local police and keeping them informed about developments in the case. "Detective Gary said we can finally go back to Asheville tomorrow," Clara said, relief evident in her voice. "Start rebuilding our lives there." Emmy's eyes lit up. I still can't believe I'm going to see a real city. I mean, I've been to the local towns for supplies and doctor visits, but never somewhere like Asheville. It's not exactly New York, Clara laughed, but it's beautiful. You'll love it. Bran approached their table, bringing a fresh round of drinks. These are on the house, he said, setting them down carefully. A little celebration for your last night in our sleepy corner of nowhere. Thank you, Bran, Clara smiled warmly, for everything. He shrugged modestly. Least I could do, considering. Have you heard from your father? Emmy asked, her voice soft with concern, despite everything Rowan had been part of. Bran's expression tightened slightly. He's still helping the authorities. His trial date is set for 8 days from now. He turned to Clara. The information he provided led the police to catch those creditors who were dealing with my mother back then, the ones who were after my dad's debt. The traffickers, Clara clarified, her tone hardening slightly. Bran nodded. They had a base here in Willow Reach. Police raided it a few days ago, but according to Dad, a few of the men escaped. The main base of their operation is still unknown. Clara took a sip of her drink, processing this. Detective Gary mentioned something about that. He said the Kessler farm was being used for money laundering, channeling funds from the trafficking organization. Makes sense, Bran said, leaning against their table. Farms are perfect for money laundering. Cash-based transactions make it easy to blend dirty money with legitimate income. Plus, there's all those physical assets, land, equipment, livestock, and out here in rural areas, audits are pretty light. How would they do it exactly? Emmy asked, curiosity evident in her voice. Lots of ways, Bran replied. Over-reporting or under-reporting crops and livestock to manipulate incoming or outgoing money, creating phantom harvests that never happened, listing fake employees or laborers on the payroll. Perfect setup, especially for a well-established farm like the Kesslers. Emmy shook her head, still processing the truth about the people who raised her. I never suspected anything. They always seemed so normal. Strict, but normal. Sensing the conversation heading into heavier territory, Emmy straightened in her chair and forced a smile. Let's talk about something more cheerful. I still can't believe that after 18 years I'm finally leaving this place. She chuckled softly, though I'll miss some things about it. Like what? Clara asked, eager to learn more about her daughter's life. The quiet mornings, the way fog hangs over the valley at dawn, even the smell of fresh hay. Emmy's eyes grew distant with memory. But I'm ready for something new. Trust me, Bran said with a grin. There's a whole world outside this boring rural place. You deserve to experience it all after everything you've been through. I'm nervous, Emmy admitted, but excited too. We'll take it one day at a time, Clara reassured her, reaching across the table to squeeze Emmy's hand. They finished their drinks, keeping the conversation light. As the evening wound down, Clara glanced at her watch. We should probably head back. Tomorrow will be a long day. The three said their goodbyes, with Bran wishing them well for their fresh start. Clara and Emmy walked out of Miller's Tavern into the cool night air, making their way to Clara's car in the parking lot. As Clara settled behind the wheel, she glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. A man had just stepped out of a car parked at the far end of the lot, meeting with two other men in the shadows. Something about his profile, the way he carried himself, struck Clara as hauntingly familiar. David? She whispered, squinting to see better in the dim lighting. What's wrong? Emmy asked, noticing Clara's sudden tension. Clara continued staring into the mirror, but the three men had already entered the tavern, disappearing from view. Nothing, she said finally, shaking her head. I just thought I saw someone I knew, but it couldn't be. Are you sure you're okay to drive? Emmy pressed, concerned. We could always call a cab. I'm fine, Clara insisted, starting the engine. I barely touched my drink, just tired, I guess. As they drove through the quiet country roads toward their temporary accommodations, Emmy broke the comfortable silence. Clara, can I ask you something? Anything. When we get to Asheville, do you think I could look into treatments for this? Emmy touched her birthmark self-consciously. For the port wine stain. Clara glanced over, surprised. Why would you want to do that? Your birthmark is beautiful, special. Emmy sighed softly. In the bar tonight, I couldn't help noticing people staring. Not just a few girls, but men too, like I'm some kind of freak. Not everyone is like that, Clara countered gently. Bran doesn't see you that way. I know some people appreciate it, or at least don't judge, Emmy acknowledged. But if it's this noticeable in a small rural place, what will it be like in Asheville? Asheville is smaller than you might think, Clara said, and the community there is open-minded, accepting. Emmy nodded, but Clara could see uncertainty lingering in her eyes. Look, Clara said softly, I know this is a big change for you. This whole week has been life-altering. Start with one step at a time. If you still feel strongly about treatment later, we can look into options. It would be expensive, but if it's what you truly want, I'll support you. Don't birthmarks usually fade over time? Emmy asked. Sometimes, yes, but yours has always been... Clara searched for the right word. Stubborn, Emmy supplied with a small smile. Like me, apparently. She gazed out the window at the passing darkness. You're right about the cost. We should focus on rebuilding our lives first. Maybe I could find a job in Asheville after we settle in. They pulled into the parking lot of their temporary apartment building. As they exited the car, Clara instinctively reached for Emmy's hand. Remember, she said, you're not alone in this. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Emmy squeezed her hand in return, and together they entered the building, leaving the uncertainty of the night behind them. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect day for new beginnings. Clara was already dressed and moving efficiently around the apartment, double-checking that everything was packed for their departure to Asheville. She zipped their bags closed just as the intercom buzzed. Crossing to the wall unit, Clara pressed the button to activate the small screen. Detective Gary Holden's face appeared, his expression professional but friendly. Morning, Clara. We're here to escort you back to Asheville. We'll be right down, she replied, buzzing him in. Emmy emerged from the bathroom, hair still damp from her shower. Was that Detective Gary? Yes, he's here to take us home. Clara couldn't help the small thrill that ran through her at the word home with her daughter. They finished gathering their belongings as a knock sounded at the door. Clara opened it to find Detective Gary waiting in the hallway. All set to go? He asked. Yes, we're ready, Clara confirmed. As she spoke, a figure appeared behind the detective, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. Standing there, looking slightly travel-worn but undeniably himself, was David Marin, her ex-husband and Emmy's father. David, Clara gasped. What are you doing here? I thought you were still in Colorado. David smiled, the familiar crinkles forming around his eyes. I wanted to surprise you both. He stepped forward, extending his hand to Detective Gary. I flew in this morning and went straight to the police station. Figured Gary here could bring me along. Emmy stood frozen, staring at the father she had never known. Her eyes moved quickly between Clara and David, searching for similarities, for connections. You must be Emmy, David said softly, his voice thick with emotion. I can't tell you how long I've waited for this moment. A smile spread across Emmy's face, charmed by this unexpected reunion. It's nice to meet you, Dad. The word sounded foreign on her tongue, yet somehow right. Clara, however, couldn't shake the nagging memory from the previous night. David, were you at Miller's Tavern last night? I could have sworn I saw someone who looked just like you in the parking lot. David's expression remained casual. No, like I said, I just arrived this morning, came straight to the police station to meet Gary. He winked playfully. Maybe you just missed me so much you started seeing things. No, Clara began, then shook her head. Never mind. David turned his attention back to Emmy. I know this is all happening under unusual circumstances, but I'm so happy we can be together again like this. All three of us. Detective Gary cleared his throat. If you're all ready, we should get going. It's a 2-hour drive back to Asheville. David and the detective helped carry the suitcases down to the waiting cars. Emmy followed, clearly excited by this unexpected development. Clara remained behind momentarily to handle the checkout at the front desk. While waiting for the desk clerk to process her paperwork, Clara quickly checked her phone, realizing she hadn't looked at her messages since the previous day. Among several work-related emails was one that caught her attention. From Lila Dalton, the photographer whose work had led Clara to Emmy. She opened it, curious. "Clara, I happen to be in Asheville with a journalist for another assignment, and I would love to meet you for coffee today at 3 p.m. if you're available, to hear about your reunion with your daughter. We're considering covering your remarkable story if you're open to sharing it. Looking forward to your response, Lila Dalton. P.S. We'd prefer to meet just with you to capture the story from your perspective. We'll reach out to Emmy separately at a later date." Clara frowned slightly at the postscript. Why would they want to separate them? Then again, perhaps they wanted her unfiltered emotions without Emmy present. The timing seemed unusually coincidental. How did Lila know they would be in Asheville today? But then, rereading the email, she noticed Lila mentioned being there for another assignment. Perhaps she had simply remembered Clara was from Asheville. Her checkout complete, Clara joined the others outside, finding Emmy chatting animatedly with David, while Detective Gary waited by his vehicle. "Everything okay?" the detective asked as she approached. "Yes, just finished checking out," Clara replied, then turned to the group. "I just received an email from Lila Dalton, the photographer who took Emmy's picture for the magazine. She's in Asheville and wants to meet me for coffee at 3. "You should go," David encouraged immediately. "It would be good for you." Clara hesitated. "It seems a bit rushed, and I was hoping to spend the day helping Emmy settle in." "Don't worry about me," Emmy assured her. "I'm not 5 years old anymore. I can take care of myself for a few hours." After a moment's consideration, Clara nodded and quickly typed a reply accepting the invitation. "While we're making plans," David said, turning to Detective Gary, "I was wondering if I might be able to see the Kessler farm before we leave. I'd like to understand where my daughter grew up." Gary frowned. "I'm afraid that's not possible. The property is still protected as part of an ongoing investigation." "I understand," David persisted, "but surely you could make an exception. I don't need to go inside, just see the place from the outside. It won't take long." The detective considered this request. "It's about 20 minutes from here," he said finally. "I could take you for a quick look, but no more than 15 minutes, and you can't enter any buildings, just the external grounds." "That's all I'm asking," David agreed readily. "Thank you." Clara and Emmy got into Clara's car, while David joined the detective in the police vehicle. As they pulled out of the apartment complex parking lot, Clara couldn't help feeling unsettled about the sudden change in plans. "Are you okay with going to the farm?" she asked Emmy, noticing her daughter's suddenly pensive expression. Emmy nodded slowly. "Yes, I suppose it's fair that he wants to see where I grew up. After all, he just arrived this morning and hasn't been following the case like you have." Clara squeezed her hand reassuringly, trying to push aside her own misgivings as they followed Detective Gary's car toward the place that had been Emmy's prison and home for 18 years. The gravel crunched beneath the tires as they pulled into the familiar lot outside Kessler Farm. The property looked different in the morning light, less imposing than it had a week ago when Clara first arrived searching for her daughter, yet somehow more sinister now that she knew the truth about what had happened there. Detective Gary parked his vehicle, and Clara pulled in beside him. As they exited their cars, the detective reminded everyone, "Please don't touch anything. This is still an active crime scene." Emmy stared up at the farmhouse with a complex expression. "I think I'll stay in the car," she said quietly. "I'm not ready to be back there yet." Clara immediately placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. "I'll stay with you." "I understand," Detective Gary said sympathetically. "Mr. Marin and I will just take a quick look around. We won't be long." As the two men walked toward the farm buildings, Clara and Emmy remained by the car, stepping out only for some fresh air. The morning sun was warm on their faces, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and soil across the property. After a few minutes of silence, Emmy spoke. "Maybe one day after I've had time to process everything, I'll want to find John and Miriam again. Ask them some questions." "What kind of questions?" Clara asked gently. Emmy sighed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I still don't understand why. If they wanted a child so badly, they kept me so isolated, made me cover my birthmark with makeup whenever we went out. Her fingers unconsciously traced the distinctive mark. I know it was partly to avoid being discovered, but... She trailed off, struggling with the contradiction. But what bothers you most? Clara prompted. Why adopt a child with a birthmark in the first place if they were just going to try to hide it? Emmy's voice grew stronger with frustration. Those people were traffickers. They must have had other options, other children without such a distinctive feature. Clara nodded slowly, contemplating this. That's a good question. One I'd like the answer to as well. I asked the police, Emmy continued, but they said John and Miriam never gave a clear answer, just that they were drawn to me at first sight. She scoffed softly. That doesn't make sense now. Sometimes love comes with control, Clara said thoughtfully. People try to protect what they treasure, even if they do it in harmful ways. I suppose so, Emmy conceded, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. Their conversation was interrupted as they noticed Detective Gary standing alone near the farmhouse, answering a phone call while David was nowhere in sight. I'm going to take a last look around, Clara decided suddenly. Are you okay here by yourself for a few minutes? Emmy nodded. Go ahead, I'll be fine. Clara walked across the property, passing Detective Gary, who acknowledged her with a brief smile as he continued his call. As she approached the farmhouse, she spotted David emerging from the front door, exactly where the detective had explicitly forbidden anyone to enter. Suspicion flaring, Clara quickened her pace. David looked startled when he noticed her approaching, clearly not expecting to be caught. What are you doing? Clara demanded. Gary specifically said no one should go inside. David recovered quickly, his charm sliding back into place. I just took a quick peek. You know me. I've always been curious. Yes, I do know you, Clara replied, studying his face carefully. Always stubborn, always making use of opportunities. David's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. I just wanted to see the kind of home my daughter was raised in. Is that so wrong? Before Clara could press further, Detective Gary appeared behind them. We need to go, he said firmly. You shouldn't be standing this close to the police line. Clara and David made their way back to the vehicles, but an uneasy feeling clung to Clara. She could tell David was hiding something. She saw it in how he avoided her eyes, in the subtle stiffness of his shoulders. As they reached the cars and went separately inside, Clara cast one final glance at the farmhouse. Had David really just taken a quick look inside? What else could he have done? The drive back to Asheville took about 2 hours, the scenery gradually shifting from rural farmland to the rolling mountains, and eventually the charming streets of the city Clara called home. The sun was high in the sky by the time they reached the outskirts of town. Clara's phone rang, David's name flashing on the screen. I have a surprise for Emmy, he said when she answered. I own an apartment here in Asheville that she could use if she wants. It's fully furnished. She'd just need to pick up some basic necessities. She can stay there as long as she needs. Clara glanced at Emmy in the passenger seat. Your father has an apartment in Asheville he's offering you, she explained, covering the phone slightly. It's up to you whether you want to live there or stay with me. Emmy seemed surprised by the offer. I'd love to stay with you, she said thoughtfully. But I've been thinking about what Bran said last night. Maybe I should try living on my own. I've been with adults my entire life, and I feel like I need to start building my own identity. Clara nodded, understanding, though a small part of her had hoped Emmy would choose to stay with her. She'd like to see the apartment, she told David. When they arrived at the address David provided, they found Detective Gary already inspecting the premises. The apartment was in a modern building with good security features, a relief to Clara, who was still concerned about the trafficking organization that remained at large. This is a good place, Detective Gary approved as they toured the unit. Proper security, good neighborhood. He checked his watch and frowned. I need to get back to the station. Another case requires my attention, but call if you need anything. After the detective departed, The three of them relaxed in the living room of the apartment. Clara looked around the space, noting the quality furnishings and the excellent view of downtown Asheville. "I never knew you had an apartment here," she remarked to David again, unable to keep the suspicion from her voice. David shrugged casually. "I bought it years ago after our divorce, just as an investment. I rented it to various tenants." He avoided her gaze slightly. "We were out of each other's lives, so I never mentioned it when I was in town. And honestly, my new wife wouldn't have liked it if I visited you." Clara walked to the window and pointed to a brick building a few blocks away. "That's the library where I work, Emmy. We could walk there in about 10 minutes. "Speaking of future plans," David said, turning to Emmy, "I want to help you start your new life. Have you thought about college or university?" Emmy looked surprised by the question. "You're 20 years old," David continued. "With your homeschool high school degree, you could benefit from higher education before entering the job market. I'd be happy to help with enrollment and tuition." "That's very generous," Clara interjected, "but Emmy should take things slowly. There's no rush." David nodded. "Of course, though mid-year enrollment is closing soon. If we miss that window, you'd have to wait until the next period, probably in 6 months. "I'd love to go to college," Emmy said, her eyes brightening. "I never had school friends growing up. It would be a great chance to meet people my age and build a social life." As she spoke, her hand unconsciously moved to touch her birthmark. The gesture didn't escape Clara's notice. "You're beautiful just as you are," Clara assured her. "True friends will love you exactly as you are." "Colorado has excellent aesthetic clinics and dermatology specialists," David interjected. "Laser treatments can significantly reduce port wine birthmarks these days." Emmy perked up visibly. "Is it expensive?" "The treatment?" "Probably," David admitted, "but I'd be happy to cover it as a reunion gift. Consider it making up for 18 years of missed birthdays." Clara sighed, frustrated by David's interference. "Maybe we should take things one step at a time," she suggested firmly. "Moving to Colorado and undergoing laser treatments are major decisions. It's not just about money." Emmy's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. "You're right," she agreed after a moment. "We shouldn't rush into anything, especially with the investigation still ongoing. I should wait until we're sure everything is safe." David appeared momentarily disappointed, but recovered quickly. "You're both right about the treatments," he conceded, "but the education timeline is real. Mid-year enrollment will close at the end of this month. After that, you'd have to wait until December or January." "That's no problem," Clara countered. "Emmy could work part-time for 6 months and then start college when she's ready." The atmosphere had grown tense, so Emmy quickly intervened. "I'll think about everything and make my decisions when I'm ready," she assured them both, then turned to Clara with a smile. "You were right about my father. He does have a strong personality like me." Clara laughed, grateful for the shift in mood. "Yes, you're both definitely cut from the same cloth." As the conversation naturally wound down, David checked his watch. "Clara, don't forget you have that meeting with Lila Dalton at 3. You should probably start getting ready." Clara glanced at the time. "I should take Emmy shopping first. This place literally has nothing in it." "I can handle that," David offered immediately. "You go home and get ready. Emmy and I can pick up some groceries and necessities." Emmy nodded in agreement. "Yes, I'd like some time to get to know my father better. We have a lot of catching up to do." Though reluctant to leave Emmy so soon with a man she hadn't met for 18 years, Clara understood Emmy's desire to bond with her father. With a final hug and promise to check in later, she left for her own home, pushing aside the lingering unease that had been building since David's unexpected appearance that morning. Instead of going directly home, Clara drove to the Asheville Public Library. The familiar building welcomed her like an old friend, its brick facade and wide steps unchanged, despite all that had happened in her life over the past week. Inside, several of her colleagues rushed to greet her, their faces alight with excitement. "We saw everything on the TV news," Sarah exclaimed, embracing Clara warmly. "We're so happy for you." "How is she?" "Your daughter?" Marty from Reference asked eagerly. Clara found herself surrounded by her work family, all of them genuinely thrilled by her miraculous reunion with Emmy. Their support was touching, yet Clara couldn't fully immerse herself in their celebration. Something kept nagging at her. David's unexpected appearance, his suspicious behavior at the farm, his eagerness to separate her from Emmy. When the initial excitement calmed, Clara pulled Sarah aside. "I need to talk to you about something," she said quietly. "Something doesn't feel right." In the staff room, over hastily made cups of tea, Clara explained her concerns about David. "I think I saw him at Miller's Tavern last night, meeting with 2 men. But when I mentioned it, he denied being there, insisting he just arrived this morning." Sarah frowned. "That is strange. Then at the Kessler farm he went inside the house when Detective Gary wasn't looking. And now he's suddenly talking about taking Emmy to Colorado for college and treatments for her birthmark. Maybe he's just excited to meet his daughter after 18 years, Sarah suggested reasonably. It would be natural for him to want to help her. "I know," Clara sighed, "but something feels off, and he has another wife, so why this sudden interest in Emmy's future? Why offer to pay for expensive treatments and college?" "When you put it that way, it does sound suspicious," Sarah agreed. "What are you going to do?" "I'm not sure yet," Clara admitted, "but I think I need to learn more about what David's been doing all these years." With renewed purpose, Clara moved to one of the library computers and began researching her ex-husband's business activities. If he could afford an apartment in Asheville, plus expensive medical treatments and college tuition, he must be doing well financially. She found several articles about David's business ventures. Apparently, he owned multiple cloud kitchen spaces in Colorado, facilities people could rent for cooking and recording content for videos or TV shows. It seemed like a lucrative operation, but Clara frowned as she read further. When David had left her after Ella's disappearance, he'd been working in civil service, a steady but modest-paying job with the local government. The sudden transformation into a successful businessman struck Clara as unusual. Where had the startup capital come from? How had he developed such business acumen? His wife, perhaps? On a hunch, Clara searched for information about his wife. The articles mentioned her name, Tasia Marin. Driven by curiosity and growing suspicion, Clara found Tasia's social media profile and sent her a carefully worded message. "Hello, Tasia. I'm David's ex-wife, Clara. I'm sure you've heard he's in Asheville now after we found our daughter. I hope we can meet someday. Wishing you well." She tried to keep the message light and non-confrontational, not wanting to raise any alarms. After sending it, Clara checked the time. It was approaching 3 p.m. She needed to leave for her meeting with Lila Dalton. Clara arrived at the cafe designated in the email and found a quiet table by the window. After 15 minutes of waiting with no sign of Lila or any journalist, she began to worry. She checked the email again and sent a follow-up message asking if they were still planning to meet. No response. With growing unease, Clara called the main number for Vogue magazine that she had saved from her previous conversations with them. "Hello, I'm trying to reach Lila Dalton," she explained when the receptionist answered. "Is she currently in Asheville?" "Ms. Dalton," the receptionist repeated. "No, she's currently in Los Angeles for a shoot. She won't be back on the East Coast until next week." Clara's blood ran cold. "You're certain? She didn't send a team to Asheville for an interview today." "Absolutely not," the receptionist confirmed. "Is there a problem?" "Thank you for your help," Clara replied, avoiding the question. She hung up, her mind racing. If Lila wasn't in Asheville, who had sent the email? And why fabricate a meeting that would separate her from Emmy? As these thoughts swirled through her mind, Clara's phone pinged with a notification. It was a response from Tasia. "Clara, I'm no longer married to David. We divorced 10 years ago. Last I heard from mutual friends, he had moved to a different state, but no one seems to know where. I hope you and your daughter are safe." 10 years ago. The room seemed to tilt around Clara as the truth crashed down on her. David hadn't just lied about entering the farmhouse. He might have been lying about his entire life. There was no wife in Colorado. And his business? Could that be a fabrication too? The articles she'd seen online appeared credible, but now even they felt suspect. How much of David's story was real, and how much was a carefully woven illusion? Panic surged through Clara as she tried to call Emmy. No answer. She tried David's number, same result. As fear threatened to overwhelm her, Clara forced herself to think clearly. She dialed Detective Gary's number, relieved when he answered on the second ring. "Detective, it's Clara Marin. I think Emmy is in danger." Clara sprinted to her car, her heart pounding with fear and determination. While driving toward Emmy's apartment, she explained everything to Detective Gary over speakerphone. "First, I saw David at the Kessler farmhouse when you weren't looking," she said, her voice tense. "He walked inside when he wasn't supposed to. And last night, I'm certain I saw him at Miller's Tavern with 2 men, even though he claimed to have just arrived this morning." "What else?" Gary pressed, the sound of shuffling papers in the background suggesting he was already mobilizing resources. "I just learned he's been lying about his life in Colorado. He doesn't have a current wife. They divorced 10 years ago. No one knows where he's been living." "Stay where you are," Gary instructed firmly. "Don't approach them alone. I'll send officers to the apartment immediately." "I can't just wait," Clara protested, already pulling onto the street where the apartment building stood. "She's my daughter." Gary's voice softened slightly. "I understand, but if David is involved with these traffickers, he could be dangerous. Meet us at the apartment, but don't go up alone." Clara parked hastily outside the building and rushed to the entrance. She pressed Emmy's apartment number on the intercom repeatedly, but received no answer. Frustrated, she approached the front desk. "Excuse me, I need to check on my daughter in apartment 403, she explained urgently. "We were just here a few hours ago with Detective Gary Holden." The receptionist regarded her sympathetically but shook her head. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't give you access to another resident's apartment without their permission." "But you saw us earlier. She's only been living here for a few hours," Clara pressed. "I understand, but rules are rules," the receptionist replied firmly. "I can try calling the apartment for you if you'd like." Before Clara could respond, her phone rang. Detective Gary again. "Clara, where are you?" he asked without preamble. "At the apartment building, but they won't let me up," she replied. "Perhaps that's for the best right now," Gary said. "Listen carefully. Willow Reach Police just contacted me. Someone tipped them off about documents in the Kessler farmhouse, transaction records containing an address that might be the traffickers' main headquarters." Clara's blood ran cold. "Documents in the farmhouse where David went inside when you weren't looking." "Exactly," Gary confirmed. "Now that we know we can't trust him, this could be a false lead, or worse, a trap. I've warned them to approach with caution. In the meantime, I've alerted border patrols and transportation hubs to watch for David." Clara pressed a hand to her forehead, trying to think. "Emmy mentioned they were going grocery shopping," she remembered suddenly. "There's only one major supermarket near the apartment." "I'll meet you there," Gary decided. "Don't approach them if you see them. Wait for backup." Clara ended the call and rushed back to her car, desperation clawing at her chest. The thought of losing Emmy again after just finding her was unbearable. She wouldn't let that happen. The drive to the supermarket took only minutes, but each second felt like an eternity. As she pulled into the parking lot, Clara scanned the area frantically for any sign of Emmy or David. Inside the store, she rushed through each aisle, drawing curious glances from other shoppers as she searched desperately. No Emmy, no David. Back in the parking lot, she spotted Detective Gary arriving with several officers. She hurried to meet them. "They're not here," she reported breathlessly. "I've checked everywhere." Gary nodded grimly. "We need to review the security footage. If they were here at all, we'll see where they went." Together, they approached the supermarket's security office. After Gary showed his badge and explained the urgency of the situation, the security team agreed to review their footage immediately. On the monitors, they watched as David and Emmy entered the store approximately an hour earlier. They barely browsed the aisles before David received a phone call. After that, they quickly exited without purchasing anything. "Can you show us the parking lot footage?" Gary requested. The security officer switched cameras, and they watched as David and Emmy met 2 men by a black SUV. All four got into the vehicle and drove away. "Pause and zoom in on those men," Gary instructed. Clara leaned forward, studying the grainy images. "Those are the same men I saw with David at Miller's Tavern last night," she confirmed, her voice hollow with dread. Gary quickly noted the vehicle's license plate and time of departure. "They left about an hour and 50 minutes ago," he calculated. "If they were moving quickly, they could have already left Asheville." Within minutes, Gary had coordinated with police departments in surrounding counties. The tension in the security office was palpable as they waited for any news. Finally, Gary's radio crackled to life. "Detective Holden, we've received a report of your target vehicle entering Macon County, attempting to track through street cameras now." Clara felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. They had a lead, but Emmy had been gone for nearly 2 hours, traveling with men connected to a trafficking organization. "I'm coming with you," she told Gary, her tone leaving no room for argument. After a moment's hesitation, Gary nodded. "Leave your car here, you'll ride with me." As they hurried to Gary's vehicle, Clara sent up a silent prayer for her daughter's safety. She couldn't lose Emmy again, not when they had only just found each other. The police cruiser sped down the highway toward Macon County, lights flashing but sirens silent. Detective Gary kept one hand on the wheel while the other operated his radio, coordinating with various law enforcement agencies across the region. Clara sat rigid in the passenger seat, straining to hear each update. "Update from Willow Reach," Gary reported grimly after one call. "The address from those farmhouse documents was a trap. There was a gunfight when officers arrived. One officer injured, but they managed to capture 3 men." "Are they talking? Do they know where David might be taking Emmy?" Clara asked urgently. Gary shook his head. "They say they were just hired muscle, paid to take down anyone who came through the door. Apparently they had no idea it would be the police. One of them let slip to the officers on scene that his boss was getting ready to vanish. No one knows where he's headed." Clara clenched her fists in frustration. So David was working with them all along. He must have planted those documents to distract the police while he took Emmy. "It's looking that way," Gary confirmed, his expression grim. "No wonder he was so eager to see the farm this morning. He needed to plant the false lead. And no wonder he was so eager for me to leave for that Lila Dalton. That was a trap too, so he could separate me from Emmy quickly." They continued driving deeper into Macon County, following the route that local police had tracked the black SUV taking. The landscape grew increasingly rural, with small towns giving way to scattered farmhouses and thick forests. As they approached an intersection where a small country road met the highway, Clara suddenly leaned forward, pointing through the windshield. "There's something happening over there," she said urgently. Gary slowed the cruiser, noticing a small crowd gathered by the roadside. Emergency lights flashed in the distance. "Stay in the car," he instructed Clara as he pulled over, but she was already opening her door, driven by maternal instinct and desperate hope. As they approached the commotion, Clara's heart nearly stopped. In the center of the gathering was Emmy, being attended to by paramedics. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her face scratched, and she was clearly in shock, unable to speak, as medical personnel examined her injuries. "Emmy!" Clara cried, rushing forward. The paramedics made way for her as she knelt beside her daughter. Emmy's eyes were vacant, her body trembling slightly, but she seemed to recognize Clara, leaning into her embrace. "What happened here?" Gary demanded, addressing the local police officers who had secured the scene. "Witness reports indicate a black SUV was driving through when a female passenger suddenly jumped from the moving vehicle," an officer explained. "A male passenger, later identified as David Marin, pursued her on foot, but the 2 other men in the vehicle opened fire, apparently shooting at both of them." "David was shot?" Clara asked, looking up from Emmy. The officer nodded. "Yes, ma'am, he's being treated in another ambulance. The female, your daughter, I presume, managed to evade the gunfire. One of our witnesses was a military veteran who happened to be heading to a shooting range. He had a licensed shotgun in his trunk and used it to subdue the 2 shooters before they could escape or cause further harm." "They're in custody," Gary confirmed. "Yes, sir, being processed now." Clara turned her attention back to Emmy, who remained silent, her eyes unfocused. "Is she going to be all right?" she asked one of the paramedics anxiously. "Physically, her injuries appear superficial. Cuts, bruises, possible dislocation in her right arm," the paramedic replied. "But she's experiencing acute psychological trauma. We need to transport her to the hospital immediately for a full evaluation." "I'm coming with her," Clara stated firmly. The paramedic nodded, understanding. "Of course." Meanwhile, Detective Gary was coordinating with the local police, examining the black SUV and questioning the subdued gunman. "We need to get her to the hospital now," a paramedic announced, helping Emmy onto a stretcher. "Her blood pressure is dropping." Clara climbed into the ambulance beside her daughter, holding her hand tightly as the vehicle pulled away from the scene, sirens wailing. Through the rear windows, Clara caught a glimpse of another ambulance where David was being treated, surrounded by police officers. Even though she couldn't yet see the entire puzzle, one thing was undeniable. Her husband was connected to a dangerous trafficking organization that sold her daughter to the Kesslers, regardless of his role or whatever he intended to do here. The contrast hit her with sharp, unforgiving clarity. Now, after 18 years, he had resurfaced to try and reclaim her. But for what unknowable reason? As the ambulance sped toward the hospital, Clara whispered reassurances to Emmy, who remained unresponsive, locked in the prison of her trauma. Clara silently vowed that she would never let anyone harm her daughter again, no matter what it took. The emergency room bustled with activity as Emmy was rushed through the sliding doors on a stretcher, Clara hurrying alongside. Medical staff immediately surrounded them, asking questions about Emmy's condition that Clara could only partially answer. "Her name is Emmy Wells. Legally, though her birth name is Ella Marin," Clara explained rapidly. "She's 20 years old. I don't know her medical history. We were only reunited last week after she was abducted as a toddler." The doctors exchanged glances at this unusual explanation, but maintained their professional focus. "She's in shock," one nurse observed. "Blood pressure is low but stable. Multiple contusions, possible right shoulder dislocation." "We need to take her for x-rays," a doctor decided. "Ma'am, you'll need to wait here." Clara reluctantly released Emmy's hand, watching helplessly as they wheeled her daughter away through swinging doors. Left alone in the waiting area, Clara sank into a molded plastic chair, her body suddenly heavy with exhaustion and worry. Minutes stretched into an hour as Clara waited for news about Emmy's condition. Throughout this time, police officers came and went, occasionally updating her on the situation. David had been taken to surgery to remove a bullet from his leg. The two gunmen were in custody and being questioned. Police were coordinating a search for Alexander Andreevsky, the alleged mastermind of the trafficking operation. Finally, a doctor emerged to speak with Clara. "Mrs. Marin, your daughter's physical injuries are relatively minor, cuts, bruises, and a partial dislocation of her right shoulder, which we've reduced. We've sedated her lightly to help with the pain and to allow her to rest." "And psychologically?" Clara asked, dreading the answer. The doctor's expression grew more serious. "She's experiencing acute stress reaction, what we commonly call psychological shock. She's not speaking, though she seems to understand what's happening around her. I'd like to consult with our psychiatric team about next steps, but for now, rest is the best medicine." "Can I see her?" "Of course, she's been moved to a room upstairs. We'd like to keep her overnight for observation." As Clara followed the doctor to Emmy's room, a police officer approached them in the hallway. "Mrs. Marin, I have an update for you," he said. "Detective Holden asked me to keep you informed." Clara paused. "Go ahead." "We've been questioning the men from the SUV," the officer explained. "They admitted to being close associates of Mr. Marin during their time working together and shared some disturbing details. It seems your ex-husband, David Marin, has had a deeply entangled relationship with both the Kessler family and Alexander Andreevsky's trafficking organization." "What kind of relationship?" Clara asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "According to our preliminary investigation, Mr. Marin was the one who arranged for Maurice Pledger to abduct your daughter 18 years ago. He told Pledger that if she did it, Her husband's gambling debts would be erased. Clara's legs threatened to give way beneath her. David sold our daughter? His own child? The officer nodded grimly. The suspects claimed David had told them many times how he was unhappy with your marriage and resented the modest lifestyle you had as a librarian. Apparently, he was already working for Andreevsky during that time, and when the opportunity arose, he left you. Using Maurice as the front, they sold Ella to the Kesslers, believing she'd have a better life with a wealthy family. He knew he couldn't raise her himself, not with the kind of work he was involved in. He's been laundering money for Andreevsky, which explains the front of his so-called business. Why the Kesslers specifically, and why did they accept a child with such a distinctive birthmark if they were trying to hide her origins? The arrangement was mutually beneficial, the officer explained. Your husband needed a wealthy family to raise Ella, and the Kesslers wanted a child. They got both, a daughter and a financial boost to grow their farm, courtesy of the trafficking network's laundering operation. They wouldn't dare mistreat Emmy, not with the kind of people who brokered the deal, keeping an eye on things. Clara struggled to process this betrayal. Then after all these years, when David heard I'd found Emmy, he came to Willowreach, supposedly to tie up loose ends for Andreevsky by planting false leads for the police. But it seems he had his own agenda, to take Emmy for himself. Why? After 18 years, why would he suddenly want her back? The officer hesitated. We're not entirely sure yet. The suspects weren't privy to his personal motivations. Clara nodded distractedly, her mind reeling from these revelations. Thank you for telling me. Please keep me updated on any further developments. The officer assured her they would, then departed. Clara continued following the doctor to Emmy's room, her heart heavy with the knowledge of David's betrayal. Emmy lay in the hospital bed, her injured arm immobilized, her face pale against the white pillows. Though her eyes were open, she seemed distant, locked in some interior space where Clara couldn't reach her. Hey, Clara said softly, taking a seat beside the bed. I'm here. Emmy didn't respond verbally, but her eyes tracked to Clara's face, a flicker of recognition passing through them. You're safe now, Clara continued, gently taking Emmy's uninjured hand. The police have those men in custody. They can't hurt you anymore. A tear slipped down Emmy's cheek, the first visible emotion she'd shown since the incident. The doctor says you're going to be okay physically, Clara told her. Your shoulder will heal. The rest, well, they have people who can help with that too. Trauma specialists. Emmy's lips trembled slightly, but she remained silent. Clara leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. I am so proud of you. You saved yourself, Emmy. You had the courage to jump from that car when you realized something was wrong. That was incredibly brave. Another tear followed the first, then another. Gradually, Emmy's breathing quickened, her chest rising and falling with suppressed emotion. It's okay to cry, Clara assured her. It's okay to feel whatever you're feeling right now. The dam broke. Emmy's face crumpled as silent sobs shook her body. Clara carefully gathered her daughter into her arms, mindful of her injuries, and held her as years of confusion, fear, and betrayal poured out. When Emmy's tears finally subsided, she pulled back slightly, her eyes red but clearer than before. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, frustration evident in her expression. You don't have to talk right now, Clara reassured her. There's plenty of time for that when you're ready. But Emmy shook her head determinedly. She swallowed hard, then forced out words that were barely audible. I wanted to go with him. What? Clara asked gently, leaning closer to hear. Emmy's voice grew marginally stronger. At first, I wanted to go with him. He promised college and treatments. She touched her birthmark with trembling fingers. We went to the grocery store, but never shopped. Clara nodded encouragingly, keeping her hand over Emmy's. He asked me to get in the car, Emmy continued haltingly. Said those men were his staff. Said we were just going for a short trip, to bond, before returning to the apartment. She paused, gathering strength before continuing. I didn't know the roads or where we were going. Then one of the men got a call. Something about a plan failing. Police looking for someone named Marin and Andreevsky. Emmy's breathing quickened as the memory surged back. David looked upset. He told them to drive him to his house in Macon, to hide him from Andreevsky, and to tell no one where he was. Promised them more money. A bitter smile curved her lips. That's when I knew he was lying. Said his house was in Colorado, but it was here, in the middle of nowhere, and he's a wanted man. What happened then? Clara prompted gently when Emmy fell silent. We fought when I asked to go back to Asheville, back to you. Emmy's voice broke slightly. He told me to be quiet, said he would explain everything. I was so scared. They would take me somewhere I didn't know, like before, so I jumped and ran. She closed her eyes as if the memory was too heavy to fully relive. He ran after me, but then they started shooting, at both of us. I don't know why they betrayed and were shooting at him too. It's all so messed up. Emmy opened her eyes, fixing Clara with a gaze full of guilt and regret. I'm so sorry. I should have gone with you. To your home. Should never have trusted him. No, Clara said firmly, cupping Emmy's face in her hands. This is not your fault. None of it is. He manipulated you, manipulated both of us. Fresh tears welled in Emmy's eyes. Please don't make me tell this story again, she whispered. Not to the police, not to anyone. I promise, Clara reassured her, stroking Emmy's hair gently. They can hear it from me. You don't have to relive it again. Emmy nodded gratefully, her eyelids growing heavy as exhaustion and medication began to overtake her. Clara continued to hold her hand, watching as her daughter drifted into sleep, her face finally peaceful after the day's ordeal. Outside the window, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the hospital grounds. Clara knew there would be more challenges ahead: legal proceedings, psychological healing, rebuilding their fragmented relationship. But for now, this quiet moment of connection was enough. After 18 years apart and a day of unimaginable betrayal, they had found their way back to each other. The gentle beeping of medical monitors provided a rhythmic backdrop to the quiet hospital room. Clara had dozed off in the visitor's chair beside Emmy's bed, her hand still loosely holding her daughter's. The morning sunlight filtered through the partially drawn blinds, casting warm stripes across the institutional tile floor. A soft knock at the door roused Clara from her light sleep. A nurse entered, smiling apologetically for the disturbance. Sorry to wake you, she said quietly. The doctor will be making rounds soon to check on Emmy. Clara straightened in her chair, wincing at the stiffness in her neck from the awkward sleeping position. Thank you, she whispered. As the nurse checked Emmy's vital signs, Clara stepped into the hallway to stretch her legs. A police officer stood stationed by the door, a precautionary measure Detective Gary had insisted upon until Alexander Andreevsky was apprehended. He acknowledged Clara with a respectful nod. Any news? She asked him. Nothing major overnight, ma'am, he replied. Detective Holden said he'd be by this morning with an update. Clara thanked him and was about to return to the room when she spotted Detective Gary walking down the corridor, carrying 2 paper cups of what smelled like decent coffee. Thought you might need this, he said, handing her one of the cups. You're a lifesaver, Clara replied gratefully, accepting the offering. How's the investigation going? Gary glanced around the busy hallway. Let's find somewhere more private to talk. They found a quiet corner somewhere out of earshot. David Marin is out of surgery, he began. The bullet was removed successfully from his leg. He's under guard and will be formally charged once he's medically cleared. Charged with what exactly? Clara asked. For starters, kidnapping, human trafficking, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and possibly attempted murder, depending on what we can prove about yesterday's incident. Gary took a sip of his coffee. The 2 men from the SUV are cooperating in exchange for potential leniency. They've confirmed that David was involved from the very beginning of Ella's abduction. Clara nodded, having already heard the outline of this from the officer the previous evening. What they've added, Gary continued, is that David wasn't just involved with the trafficking organization. He worked for them regularly as a fixer. He was the middleman who laundered the money and connected desperate people with the organization. Like Maurice Pledger, Clara said bitterly. Exactly. And according to these men, David was sent to Willow Reach after news broke about Emmy's discovery. His mission was to kill her, and you. It was a test of loyalty. The two men were sent with him to ensure he followed through, to plant false leads and tie up any loose ends. But apparently he went off script, decided to take Emmy for himself instead of carrying out the hit. That's what I don't understand, Clara admitted. Why would the organization suddenly want to kill Emmy, and why would David want to keep her after 18 years? Gary hesitated before answering. We're still piecing this together, but from what we've gathered, they could have believed Emmy might have information about the organization's financial operations. The Kesslers had been laundering money through their farm for years, and Emmy grew up there. She might have seen things, heard conversations, without realizing their significance. So David wanted, what? Use her as leverage, maybe. Could be against Andreevsky. There might be some kind of power struggle, Gary suggested. The organization's starting to crack under the pressure of our investigation. But for now, it's all speculation. We won't know the full truth until we hear it from David himself. Clara shook her head in disgust. And to think I was once married to him. Clara chose her words carefully. The man I married was kind, or so I thought. Charming, ambitious. She sighed deeply. People can hide their true natures very effectively, Gary said gently, even from those closest to them. They sat in silence for a moment, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Finally, Clara asked, "What about Emmy? Is she still in danger?" "We believe the immediate threat has passed," Gary assured her. "The Kesslers are in custody. David is under guard. Most of Andreevsky's local associates have been apprehended. That said, we're still searching for Andreevsky himself, so we'll maintain protection for both you and Emmy until he's in custody." "And after that? What happens to Emmy legally? She's lived her entire life as Emmy Wells. Her documents are all forgeries. She has no official education records, no social security number under her real name." "We have specialists who handle these situations," Gary explained. "It's complicated but not insurmountable. Emmy will have the option to maintain Emmy Wells with proper documentation." Clara nodded, relieved to hear there was a path forward through the bureaucratic challenges. "And what about finding a place to live? I don't think either of us feels safe in Asheville right now, but we can't stay in this hospital forever. We can arrange temporary housing until you decide on a more permanent solution," Gary offered. "Somewhere secure, with police protection if necessary." "Thank you," Clara said sincerely, "for everything you've done. I know this case has consumed your life for the past week." Gary smiled wryly. 18 years, more accurately. Ella's disappearance was my first major case. I've never quite let it go. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only when a nurse poked her head into the room. "Mrs. Marin, Emmy is awake and asking for you." Clara quickly stood, thanking Gary again before hurrying back to Emmy's room. She found her daughter sitting up in bed, looking more alert than she had since the incident. "Hey," Clara greeted her softly. "How are you feeling this morning?" Emmy considered the question seriously. Sore, confused, angry. She met Clara's eyes directly. "But better than yesterday." Clara took a seat beside the bed, relief washing over her at hearing Emmy speak so clearly. "That's good. The doctor should be here soon to check on you." Emmy nodded absently, her hand instinctively touching her birthmark. "I've been thinking," she said after a pause. "All my life I felt like I was hiding. The Kesslers made me cover this." She traced the outline of her birthmark. "Then David, he offered to have it removed. But I don't want it gone anymore. It's part of who I am. It's how I survived all of this." A knock at the door signaled the arrival of the doctor. As he entered to examine Emmy, Clara stepped back but remained close by, watching protectively as her daughter answered the doctor's questions with growing confidence. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be legal proceedings, therapy sessions, adjustments to a new life and relationship. The shadows of trauma wouldn't disappear overnight. But as Clara observed the quiet determination in Emmy's eyes, so like her own, she felt a profound sense of hope. Life had given them both a second chance, not to recapture what was lost, but to build something new from the fragments of their shattered past. Together, they would face whatever challenges came next, one day at a time, strengthened by a bond that even 18 years of separation couldn't permanently destroy.